You are a spiritual being in physical form, a dichotomy of light and dark, where energy equals mass on a journey designed to fulfill our personal legend and purpose, to use humanity throughout, to amplify and transcend, slay the ego, raise the humanity. That's the signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the High Vibe Zone.
Hey, y'all, hey.
I love that intro so much.
It's such a good hype intro. I'm like, yeah, let's go. Let's dive into the high vibe zone.
I,
Um, Welcome everyone, LinkedIn, YouTube, watching us live or on the replay. I'm Sharice Fonts, and I'm here with.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maria, and
Uh,
I'm lucky enough to work with Charisse.
I think it's a mutual luck. I'm very excited to have you here. If this is your first time in the High Vibe Zone, welcome. You are in the right place. Nothing happens by coincidence. You're returning and coming back. Welcome back. We're going to have a great conversation for y'all today. While we are getting everything started, as you're watching, type your name in the comments. Let us know where you're joining us from. What area geographically of the world are you listening to us? And what are you grateful for? It's always a good time to start with gratitude. Maria, what are you grateful for?
Oh, I think today I'm grateful for friends who encourage you to be a better person and friends who encourage you to ask the deeper questions in life. I think that's been a recent theme lately. So I think, gratitude for real deep friendships.
Nice. That's a good thing to be grateful for.
How about you?
Oh man, I am grateful for seasons, like the weather and seasons in our lives and just honoring that. So I'm grateful for nature seasons and life seasons. So
Beautiful.
yeah. Um, all right, we got David from Toronto. Oh, Canada,
David.
what's up? Our
Yay.
friends in the north. Let's go. Welcome to the High Vibe Zone. And you are grateful for people that keep pushing the BIPOC diversity issue. Very interesting. Well, then you are in the right place because we are going to be talking about specifically the diversity conversation. So thank you for joining us here, David. All right, Maria, let's jump into it. But first, I think it's helpful for us to give a little context of kind of where this topic is coming in from. Um, Diversity isn't an issue, selective diversity is. And, in the line of work that we do with companies around their culture and inclusion, I mean, we hear the word diversity a lot. And it's really interesting when we kind of dive in a little bit more on that word diversity. We find it's actually more exclusive than what the actual word of diversity means. So I think before we dive in, I think it'd be helpful to define what diversity is, like by definition, and then really start to go into the conversation from there, if that sounds good.
That's great. Yeah, I think even narrowing down on the definition of what diversity means. I know you talk a lot about the humanity is already diverse. So if you
By
could explain
default.
that, yeah.
Yeah. So, if we're looking at the definition of diverse, so I'm going to break down the definition of diverse and the definition of diversity. One is diverse is an adjective, and so it's showing a great deal of variety, very different is pretty much the definition of that. And then diversity, the state of being diverse, variety is the noun. When we look at our human makeup, and I even go back to as a birth doula, every baby that I have helped come into this world, by definition, already has diversity built in. So diversity is a default by us being humans. We have a variety of different things. We come from different backgrounds, different experiences, and that is what collectively makes us as humans diverse. So, one thought and one question that I pose out there for folks that are looking to hire diverse people or are looking to amplify or attract diversity, is, have you ever hired someone, or have you ever met someone? Let's not even look at hiring. Have you ever met someone that wasn't diverse? By default, by definition, the answer is no. We are all diverse. So I think starting with that mind frame and that framing, that will help with the conversation that we're going to have today. And so how does that flow and sit with you, Maria? Any thoughts on that?
I love that. And I think setting up the definition is so important, because I think a lot of times we go into the more popular versions of what diversity or any topic really is, that we forget to look back and see, like, what are we actually talking about when we say the word diversity and when we say these words. So thank you for sharing those definitions. I think it sets us up for the next part of the conversation.
You're welcome. So I want to also point out that, if you're a company, and why I think this talk is really valuable, especially here in the high vibe zone, is because despite the positive side of diversity, we usually see it in it weighs really heavy on companies as they're trying to push initiatives or put things together, and really waving this like flag of diversity. And what I'm finding is, when I go into these companies, when I speak to these people, I'm like, you're already diverse. What you are focusing on is, again, what we're talking about is selective diversity. So let me break that down a little bit. Selective diversity basically means we are looking for a specific demographic within the pool of diversity, if you will. So we are looking for a specific type of human, and most selective diversity falls under gender or ethnicity. So we're either looking for women, or we're looking for Black people, or we're looking for men, and we're looking for Asian. Like, that's basically selective diversity. And when you do that, you narrow things down, and it doesn't enrich the inclusion factor, which is where companies actually should be starting versus starting at diversity. Don't worry too much around when you look around the room, oh, we're all the same shade, or we're all the same gender, or we're all the same this. Look at, are you creating an environment that is inclusive enough to bring in more of the diverse set that you've already started to create? Because if you were to break down every human, whether you say you look the same, even twins have their own, own journey, own separateness, their own diverse part of them, you will find that there are pieces of diversity already there. And again, one thing that we see less of is companies actually celebrating that. And, you get more of what you celebrate. And so I kind of want to leave it there. What are some of your thoughts around?
Well, even the celebration factor, it's like, if you have a company that looks very homogenous in a certain way, maybe it's gender, maybe it's color, or maybe it's ethnicity, it's like, okay, can you look at that group that you currently have, and what is the diversity in that group? Because everybody is different, and it might be in things you can't see with the eye. So it might be in ability, even in personalities. Like, I think that's also talked less about in the context of diversity. It's, you can have a lot of extroverts, you can have a lot of introverts. That's still part of this diversity. It's still a very important factor in inclusion. So is age. So age, ability, and there's all sorts of abilities as well. Not only the race and the color that is mostly talked about right now, as well as gender, but we have to look at it as a whole. And every human is different. Our upbringings are really part of, and like unique to us as well. It's like, maybe I look very similar to somebody else, but maybe I was raised by a single parent, or maybe this person, didn't go to college. Everybody has different experiences. So just because of the way that we look does not necessarily call for us being labeled as diverse.
Right.
So I think I really want to highlight what you said about celebrating what you already have, especially companies that are using the language, we're trying to bring more diversity, we're trying to be more inclusive. It's like, okay, yes, we need to get there. And yes, there are things that you can do to be more inclusive, but how do you celebrate what you have now? Because that will determine how you will celebrate once you do bring in those people.
That's a big point there. I mean, I might go a little out there with this, but it's when I think about goal setting and what we're trying to attract, when you set up a goal, you don't set up a goal from the fact of that you don't have something. You set up a goal of like, I will have, or it's an action of what you're doing. So for companies that are focusing on diversity or using that language around diversity, I encourage companies to really reframe that and say, we are wonderfully diverse and we are setting forth the platform to be more inclusive for all. And that just opens it up a lot more. It doesn't narrow the window. And all of these diversity statements are quite interesting. And I've sat in the room where these conversations are happening, and some of them are a little like, eek, like, oh my goodness. And I remember a company talking around their diversity statement and their goal. And essentially they were like, we want to hire more people of color, which that's another thing that we'll talk about that one later. But like, we want to hire more people of color. We want to hire more Black people. We want to hire this. And so our initiative is to have at least a third of our candidates that come in be, POC, in that demographic. And so they're sharing this out in all hands. And somebody that had been with the company for a while raised their hand and was like, isn't that like kind of a form of discrimination? Like if you're basically trying to, shouldn't it be the best person for the job? Like how can you make that as a measurement? If it was the flip side, it wouldn't sound good if it was the flip side. So it's less of the doing and more in the intentionality is where companies are missing out on the opportunity to create an ecosystem that does bring in that diverse set of humanity. Mm-hmm. I will say that I can understand where companies are starting, but the way that it is going, it's less attractive when there's these statements that fall short of the intention and the performative. And again, going into selective diversity, I talked about this. I think I had my mom here. This was a while ago. Maybe it's time to bring her back. But she had talked about when she, affirmative action. That's what affirmative action was. It was, we need to hire more Black people, essentially, is how it was painted. And my mom, I think she was in her 20s, had one of her first jobs, and it was during affirmative action. And the CEO of the company would send out a memo. And at the bottom of the memo was my mom's name as a part of the affirmative action. And she knew she was hired. She knew part of the reason why she was hired was because she was Black and she was a woman. So she checked off 2 boxes there. And I think it's really important to see that we're kind of doing very similar processes with the hiring, with promotions. Like we're not looking at it from the holistic component, and then thus putting more effort into, are they diverse? Yes, they are diverse. They already are.
Yeah, it's like,
go ahead.
Have you met a human who wasn't diverse? Have you ever met a person who, of course not. There's like, every human is different.
So I'm more of when we look at diversity is not the issue. It's more of the selective diversity. And so what is the intention with the selective diversity? Is it because you want to create an environment that resembles humanity? Do you want to create a product, or are you trying to really capture the demographic of the clients or customers that you have? You know, like it's really important to understand the motive. Or are you just doing it because that's the trend? Like people are all doing it. We need to do it too. Because that can actually get you in a lot more trouble than not doing anything, because you're then just mimicking someone else's energy or reactive energy, and you aren't really looking at, okay, what can we actually do? And here's another point to think about. I find that the diversity conversation would be less of a challenge if that was in the workplace, if that was something that was natural in your lifestyle. Does that make sense? Like, if you are automatically or just through action, you do have a diverse set of friends or people that you know, or people that you, essentially have conversations with, not on a daily basis, but really have an understanding with, it makes it so much easier to have that flow into your work and have that flow into your business versus like, oh, how do I do this? How do I talk to that person like a human?
Yep.
With kindness. Like it's really that simple. And we make it complicated when we start to select diverse, what we consider diversity. And by that, we are being exclusive. And when we are being exclusive in that area, it shows up in other areas of the business. And then it doesn't all flow together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's not about narrowing in on one aspect, which is what the selective diversity is. It's like people who are like, let's bring in this specific type of person, and then we sort of forget everybody else. But I think another thing you mentioned there is getting to know people, because sometimes at work, we're in meetings, we don't get to know people for who they are. We might be quick to judge or assume things based on what they look. So within companies, even creating environments of just relaxed conversation and getting to know one another, which I think at Culture Circle, we've been able to do really well. It's mixing the work and then the personal, and just getting to know people for who they are outside of work. Maybe they're an athlete, maybe they're an artist, like you just don't know. And so those experiences also contribute to what it is for your humanity to be diverse. And so, we have like on our team, we have people who are like very artistic. We have others who are athletes. We have others who just had a kid. So it's just like everybody brings other things, other experiences, and those add to the diversity. So you never know when that can also be a benefit at work. And that helps people bond. It creates real friendships and just real interaction. And a lot of times when companies start being more inclusive, they realize, the more different perspectives and everything we bring, that also brings difficulties and challenges, because then you have more opinions. And so how do companies, once they are slowly more inclusive, like how do you help develop that culture into something that is positive?
That's a great perspective that you bring, because I think that there's this journey that, is really important for the inclusivity factor. I think step one, just know that every person you come in contact with is diverse by default. And if you're not seeing that, then you want to just look at, well, what am I valuing or highlighting as a diversity here? And then if you're looking at that, it's, know that that's going to pinch off some other ways for you to bring in other people. I mean, you brought up a lot of things in the beginning around ability. Neurodiversity is a big one as well, which is still needing to get integrated deeper into the initial hiring component. It's like, if you're looking for this specific thing and someone is neurodiverse, they might be able to wow you in another area, but you're looking for, do they smile a lot? Do they do this? Do they do that? Like, everyone has their own different, and that's okay. Are you inclusive? Are you holding enough space for that different? And that's a big thing. And businesses tend to toggle between that. And, I think we're slowly moving out of the culture fit conversation, but it's kind of goes in that realm. Something else that I've said this before, but I've written this before. I don't know if I've said this before, but if there is a reason that a specific demographic is not attracted or in your company, there is a vibration, there is an energy there that is causing that. And you have to check that, because your vibe attracts your tribe. And so this comes down to, if we look around and we're like, we don't have a large parent demographic. Why? Maybe because the environment isn't conducive for parents. Or we don't have, women, we don't have a lot of women. Why? Maybe because the environment isn't inclusive to women. You focus on the inclusivity. It's like you build the house before you start inviting the guests in. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where we are. And when you build the house, you build it with the ramp, you build it with an accessible, like you build it from the perspective of, we want these types of we want the diverse set of humanity here. We don't want to close the door or make it difficult for anyone to join here.
And another thing there is intent. And we talk about this a lot as well. It's like, okay, so you're building this house. Why? Why do we want these certain people in it in the first place? Before we even start thinking about how we get them, it's like, why? And having that clear, and then asking why we don't have them currently.
I would encourage anyone that's listening that is really focused on diversity or has been using those words very fluently, even from the diversity and inclusion like committees. Why don't we? What is causing? Because there are companies that naturally attract and they don't have that same problem, or they don't see it as, oh, we're looking at it from a diversity problem. We have built the foundation for inclusion. Thus, anyone that comes to us can be successful, can thrive, can feel purpose, and all of these things here. So I'd really encourage y'all to think about, well, why don't we have whatever specific demographic you're looking for, and then taper that back to, okay, let's look at our inclusion. Where are we at with this? And I would be very mindful, as in not saying don't do it, but just mindful around setting specific goals based off of a selective diversity. I think that can get really dangerous, because essentially it's exclusion by inclusion is still exclusion. Yep. Right? And I want to pay attention to that, especially if you're looking at this as a long term, not just a quick fix. So if you're looking for a quick fix, yeah, you can bring in all the everything, but they won't stay. And that's what you're really looking for. And then you have a bigger problem, because investing time in a hire, if you've ever had to do that, that's money. And that's impact on the business. That's transfer of knowledge that you may or may not be able to get. That's bringing in a human and allowing them to do what they need to do in the company. You're investing there, and you can lose that investment if you're not paying attention to how and why we are bringing someone in. Don't just copy the next startup over.
Yeah. I wonder if that might be one of the symptoms of this resignation period that we're seeing, is because, like, I wonder if we plot this on a timeline, like when DEI sort of became a standard thing for companies, and now we're seeing everybody leaving. Is this like a facade that companies were putting on as like, we welcome everybody, and then everybody joins and they're like, this doesn't feel right, I'm leaving, I'm finding somewhere that does. I wonder if that has to do with it.
There are no coincidences. And I think that's a really good insight to maybe plot that, because, we did see a lot happen in 2020. We had the pandemic, we had the civil unrest, George Floyd was killed. Then we saw a lot of companies laying off people the wrong and the right way. And then that all, created some momentum. And then you enter 2021. And all of a sudden, you just see a bunch of people like exiting.
And I wonder if we say like companies are so focused on hiring, quote, diversity, do we have any information about like retention? And then if people leave, why are they leaving? And it's not to say that like we should track this in a diversity way, but I wonder if there are red flags that might be seen for companies who didn't set this up right from the beginning, who didn't have the right intent, or maybe had the right intent, but not the right methods or mindset or philosophy to go about it.
You bring up a great point. I mean, I haven't tracked this data. However, through enough conversation and observation, the roles that tend to get cut first are the diversity and inclusion roles. The roles that tend to get burned out are the diversity and inclusion roles. So I think that there's something to be said around that. And at least what we have also seen is there's very little budget around diversity and inclusion.
Mm-hmm. And kind of an interesting factor too is when with these, and I'm curious to hear from you, when companies have these departments that are DEI or stuff like that, if in the public mindset you don't consider yourself part of that, for whatever reason, like, do you feel then excluded because you are not labeled as diverse by the company? And so that brings up the topic of people maybe feeling like they're not worth that, or just because I look a certain way or I am a certain way, which are all factors none of us can control. It doesn't take away from your humanity. It's like you still have things to add and you still have struggles, and that doesn't diminish you.
You bring up such a deep point. And I've heard it so many times where people are like, oh, I'm a white male, I'm a white female, I don't have, how can I? And it's like, that right there is not, you're not speaking empowerment into your own. I think we've painted the picture backwards here. And it would be really beneficial to really stop and think here about what it is that we've heard, what resonates, what feels right, what is our gut telling us, what is our intuition telling us, and where we're headed. Because we need every single human on this journey. We will not get to the destination alone. And I look back, and I've brought this up before, I look back on like Martin Luther King Jr., I look at Mahatma Gandhi, I look at Nelson Mandela, look at Mother Teresa. They took everyone along. And yes, they were able to connect and speak to specific journeys of people's humanity, but they took everyone along. And I think that's really important when you think of building out because a very close friend of mine was like, we have a DEI committee because everyone has a DEI committee. We just need, and it's like, okay, well, what's the purpose and intention behind some of that? And how do you make it inclusive so folks can feel like, okay, I'm showing up, and regardless of what I've heard and what I look like, I can add value, because you do add value. Mm-hmm. There's every perspective is a perspective and is needed in order for us to get this thing right and going. And it's not necessarily there's this like doing of it wrong, but it is very interesting to see how, if you're not seeing things transcend, if you're working out. I shared this story the other day with somebody. It was after I had my fourth child, and I was still a part of this program of single mothers, and there was this gym that we could go work out for free with personal trainers. And I was like, maybe, I don't know, 3 months of just having Charlotte. And I would go to this gym 6 days a week. Every time I could, like 6 days a week, I would do all of the workouts, everything. And I lost not 1 pound. I did this for about 6 months. I later found out that I was a few factors played into this. One, my eating. I didn't realize, I was like, oh, I can work out and like eat whatever I want. Two, I was still in postpartum, which was a big thing. I was under a lot of stress. And it was like no amount of action could make up for the misalignment that I was experiencing. And so, yes, you might have a DEI committee. Yes, you might have a tiny budget. Yes, you might acknowledge these things. But if you're not seeing how this is transcending into your inclusion and the focus of the culture and all of that, there's things that need to be adjusted. No amount of action is going to make up for any misalignment or non-intentional focus. So it's really important to take a step back. If we're not creating an environment for everyone, especially in your DEI committee, how is that going to spill over into our hiring, our this, our that? And because each culture is unique like a fingerprint, you have to really look at it from the inside out and less of what other people are doing to bring into what you're doing. You have to look at where your demographic is. Leaders play a big part in this. Leaders play a big, big part in this. How do they see the world? How do they see others? And
how do they see themselves too?
How do they see themselves? Are you operating from guilt around this stuff? Because if you are, that's not going to transcend. And when I say transcend, it's not going to get you over that hill of destination to that destination.
Yeah, I think it's such a complex topic because it is an issue within companies, but within our broader humanity, and any organization, any group of humans coming together has to think about this, because companies are people at the end of the day. And so how do we carry ourselves with our mindset around these topics in our friend groups too? So it does go back. It's not just work life that we're talking about.
Right. Right. And it's not us versus them. It's we. It's Ubuntu. It's Ubuntu. Mm-hmm. Are you creating? I guess that's kind of how we'll leave this in so many ways. Is like, are you, instead of looking at are we a diverse company? Are you an Ubuntu company? Are you a company that recognizes that your humanness is tied to someone else's humanness, and they're great makes you great? When you look at it from that side of it, it just changes the lens. We just need a lens change. If you're in this ecosystem of diversity, you're not doing anything wrong per se. Don't stay there. You want to get to this next level because it is out there. And maybe you don't know what it looks like because it's not something that's reflected in your own personal life, but you know what it should feel like. It's not, do we have 20% Black people? Because that I find, and it's actually an interesting factor too, is this topic is so specific to a lot of US companies. But when you look at other countries and go in other worlds, how are you going to weight that? Right? It's very selective. It's very exclusive. So expand it a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And look at your inclusion. Are we Ubuntu? Are we inclusive? And if we're inclusive, we will attract what we've set up for inclusivity. There was a quote that I read or heard. This was a motivational speaker. I wonder if I could, I'm going to see if I can say it correctly. He's like, you can't get upset about the results that you never worked for. Like, you can't, he's like, he said it way better, but you can't get upset about the results that you never worked for. Like, create the inclusion first. That is the foundation. That is the work. Are we inclusive towards as many demographics as you can think of? Trust me, if you miss one, that's okay. You'll learn because your intention is there from inclusivity versus a specific selective diverse set of humanity. I think that's very, very key to highlight here.
Yeah, I think that ties all of this up very nicely. And it starts with you. It starts with our personal mindsets, our views of the world. And that will create ripples with your teams, with your leadership, with your companies, with your organizations, with your friends, with your family, everybody. I think that mindset shift is really important, and just questioning your own beliefs and your own traditional ways of thinking. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, Ubuntu, I am because we are.
Such a simple concept,
Yep.
but it's so deep. I think I've said this. I said this already, but I feel the need to share it one more time. If you keep using the language we're not diverse enough, then that is what you'll have. It reminds me of a story I heard of a person that was walking on the beach and ran into another human, and they were getting, looking at the area and wanting to move there. Actually, this is a story Wayne Dyer talks about. And he says that this person asked him, what is it like to live here? And Wayne goes, what is it like to live where you currently are? And he's like, what? She's like, well, the people are, angry and impatient and pushy, and there's not much community and this and that. And he says, well, that's what the people are like here. And then he met someone else, and in the same day, he's like, again, no coincidences. And this is a pretty interesting lesson to learn. And she was looking to move there, and she asked, what is it like to live here? And he says, well, what is it like to live where you currently are? And she goes, oh, there's a lot of community and people are kind, and it's just your neighbors, it's warm and it's friendly. He says, well, that's exactly what it's like to live here. And it's like, what you perceive is what you achieve. If you think that there is no diversity, you've excluded might as well not even go for the goal.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, you know what? There's so much diversity out there, and we're going to attract it with inclusion. Boom. Things start to open up. It starts to change the perspective.
One more story on the perspective note. We were talking with someone yesterday, and he was sharing how even kids, if you ask someone to draw a dog here in the States, you would draw it like the outline from the side. I don't remember what country he said.
He said Africa.
In Africa, I don't remember what specific country, but they draw it from the top because that's the way you see a dog. And so who are we to say one is right and one is wrong? You can't. This is the same with diversity, because we each carry within us a different lens and a different way that we see the world, and there is no right or wrong. We just have to welcome those perspectives.
Right. And the way that, and this is definitely for another conversation. It's like, well, we want company, a specific type of perspective, or we want this. Just know that it's really challenging to separate by thread a human experience. And so if you can align universally on a few things, you're doing pretty well. And the rest is a lesson. The rest is a journey. The rest requires the development side and creating that. So I would encourage y'all, as you're listening to this live or listening at the replay, to rethink the concept of diversity. I'm not asking you to change anything. I just want you to look at it from a different perspective. And know that diversity has never been an issue, ever. What has been the issue is our selective diversity and the way that we view our humanity, the way that we view ourselves. We are by nature diverse. By definition, diverse. Now, how do we create an environment that is inclusive enough to hold the space for the diverse set of humanity? That is what I would encourage us to focus on in this next season. That is what's important. Any last thoughts from you, Maria?
I don't think I can top that.
Well, then so it is. We want to thank you for being with us in the High Vibe Zone. I'm going to throw up a banner real quick. Talk a little bit about Culture Circle. We're like vitamin C for company cultures. We help create healthy and inclusive workplace cultures. So if you want to dive in a little bit deeper around the topic of diversity, selective diversity, inclusion, your culture, reach out to us. We are here. We love having virtual teas with humans. So we're happy to have one with you. Yes, we all
Cheers.
Cheers. And so you don't have to go at this journey alone. And sometimes it's just another perspective to spark what is already inside of you. I know I kind of said one last thing, but I'm going to share something that came out of my run this morning. You are your own best motivator. This is, I guess, outside the topic. You know your motive more than someone else. And sometimes it just is a conversation to help align you with that motive so you can move forward. I think that maybe that's another conversation for the high vibe zone. Let's put a pin in that one. So
preview for the next one.
Yes, we're going to talk about that later. But like, if you need some guidance around what are we doing? How are we doing this? Are we doing this right? We want to do it better. Reach out to us. We're here to help. Happy to have a virtual tea with you. We're not going to sell you. We just want to help because we spend 1/3 of our lives at work. The culture is so important. Go with it with a guiding mindset. You don't need to have all the answers, but sometimes through conversation, you find that you already do have all the answers. So reach out to us. We're here. We're happy to help. Want to thank you all for being here with us in the High Vibe Zone. I'm Sharice Fons, and I'm here with
Maria Vargas.
And we hope that you have a great rest of your day. Light, love, and gratitude. Thank you for being here with us in the High Vibe Zone.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Bye.
You are a spiritual being in physical form, a dichotomy of light and dark, where energy equals mass on a journey designed to fulfill our personal legend and purpose, to use humanity throughout, to amplify and transcend, slay the ego, raise the humanity. That's the signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the High Vibe Zone.